Dear God, it's beautiful.
Every time I think I'm done with the indie shooter scene, another one comes out that just pulls me right back in. This time it's for Trepang2, a gory, action-packed FPS set in the distant future and developed by the aptly named Trepang Studios. I played through the demo for this thing like 3 or so years ago, and you didn't need to spend that much time playing through that early build to see that they were definitely onto something pretty good. The easiest comparison to make here is with the Fear series, and there's no doubt that this is the primary game that Trepang2 takes influence from. You know, in case the whole super soldier with insane reflexes fighting back against paranormal threats wasn't the obvious giveaway. Instead of the ambiguously named Point Man, you're playing as the ambiguously named Subject 106. And instead of going up against Armorcam Corporation, it's one called Horizon. Much like the Point Man, Subject 106 also has heightened sensors. Now, in Fear that was called Reflex Mode, and over here in Trepang, it's called Focus. The only advantage that 106 has over the Point Man is that this guy's also got a cloaking device, like he's wearing a knockoff nanosuit from Crisis. It's also got a lot of similar themes, like the whole mysterious backstory for your character, going up against shady, corrupt corporations, along with scientific experiments gone wrong, with the player being smack bang in the middle of the whole thing and dealing with it the only way they know how.
Holy moly.
And if this is all sounding pretty good so far, don't forget you can grab the game through my GOG affiliate link, which I'll put in the video description, and if it's ever on sale, it should offer up a tidy discount on whatever that discounted price already is. And in terms of just the raw gunplay and the shooting alone, Trepang2 might honestly have some of the best gunplay I've ever seen in an FPS. I mean, just in the way that weapons sound and feel, and the sheer carnage you can create during combat. This really is about as good as it gets. The feedback you get when using a shotgun or a grenade launcher and seeing the utter devastation in glorious slow motion is something that's been carried across here just flawlessly. You've got all those various particle effects from weapons and grenades, there's blood, dust, smoke and fire, and it all looks amazing. Plus that filter they've used when you activate focus to really emphasize your heightened senses really makes you feel like you're in the cockpit of this genetically engineered super soldier. Enemy chat is also really cool. The way that enemies almost hysterically shout to each other during combat totally captures the fear that you'd expect from someone when a superhuman killer is sliding around at breakneck speeds and brutally murdering their buddies one by one. So, at its most basic form, yeah, it's just a really competent first-person shooter. For weapons, you've got the pistol, shotgun, SMG, assault rifle, DMR, grenade launcher, and then the bolt launcher. And what's kind of great about most of these is that none of them ever really seem to become redundant. I mean, even the pistol is still pretty decent, even late game, as long as you're going for headshots. And the grenade launcher, I mean, that thing's always going to be useful, just as long as you're not breathing down someone's neck when you fire it.
I appreciate what you're showing me right now.
Following in the footsteps of Fear's VK-12 is Trepang2's Spaz-12, a weapon that just becomes an outright war crime and can kill most standard enemies in a single hit. It's easily one of the best weapons in the whole game, and if you don't spend a significant amount of your playtime here using it, well, I'm sorry to tell you, but you're playing the game wrong. And the fact you could get through the majority of the campaign using this thing alone shows you how good it is. Likewise with the SMG, which looks to be based off of Vector. It's a fast-firing, hard-hitting little gun that never stops being all kinds of awesome. I actually think I prefer it to the assault rifle, simply because of the higher fire rate, which takes me back to my days of playing Modern Warfare 2 multiplayer and cheesing through lobbies with that rapid-fire attachment. The DMR, on the other hand, is probably one of the least effective weapons, only because a weapon like that's really meant for long-range gunfights, and you don't really have too many of those in the campaign. And as for the bolt launcher, well, I just never really had that many instances when it was more effective to use it over something else. And the fact that it fires 3 shots at once, combined with that low ammo count, just turned me off using it even more. I mean, as a point of comparison, the grenade launcher, also has a pretty low ammo count, but then on the other hand, the destruction you can cause with that thing, it's not even in the same league as the bolt launcher. It's not even the same sport. And then finally there's a minigun, which again I didn't find all that useful because it's got this insanely slow wind-up time to the point that it almost feels like a bit of a handicap. Grenades also play a pretty big part in the combat as well, and again there's a few different types here, from impact grenades to flashbangs and even proximity mines. And hitting someone dead on with a frag grenade is more or less going to teleport them to the goddamn Shadow Realm.
Holy moly.
The only thing I noticed there was that the hitboxes are pretty damn inconsistent, and I don't know what's going on here, but the amount of times I've thrown a grenade at someone and it seemingly just goes right through them, it's too many to count. Even when it seems to actually hit someone, it still doesn't blow up. And look, if I'm wrong, but I just assumed that impact grenades would, explode on impact.
Wrong!
I like to think that I have pretty good game sense and muscle memory for throwing grenades in, FPS games, but half the time my throws here just seem to miss entirely. Yeah, mistakes were made. But all in all, regardless of the weapon you're using, the shooting is top tier stuff. And Subject 106 is really a bit of a nasty piece of work if you're playing right. You can grab enemies and use them as human shields, and using this mechanic in tandem with the cloak, it becomes pretty easy to just run behind someone and pick them up and use them as your very own bullet magnet, snapping their neck like a pretzel stick when they've outserved their usefulness. You've got a melee punch and a kick move as well, and if you jump kick enemies at close range, it even propels you backwards, leaving them stunned and wide open for a face full of bullets. There's that gravity-defying slide move, which really never gets old. And this thing launches enemies up into the air, and if you're quick enough, you can slide into someone and then grab them in midair. This is the move I probably use the most, and I just never really got sick of slow motion sliding into a group of bad guys and gunning them all down before I'd even lost momentum. I think there's going to be some pretty filthy montage videos on YouTube of people absolutely exploiting this mechanic, assuming there's not a heap of them already. So yeah, it's really one of those kind of shooters where you get out what you put in. And if you just run around with the assault rifle and shoot enemies from a distance without ever using focus, your cloak, or any of those other moves, well, you're almost kind of doing yourself a disservice. First, I kind of hated how you have a stamina bar, but after a while I actually kind of started to appreciate it because each kill gives you a boost in stamina, and that idea right there is what encourages you to play more aggressively and really push the enemy's position. The lack of a lean button or even being able to aim down sights for better accuracy does seem like a bit of an oversight, but when you think about it in relation to the stamina system, it's something that's also probably been done for similar reasons. Because otherwise it'd probably be too easy just to hang back and peek at people from around corners like you're a camping sweat lord in Rainbow Six Siege. About halfway through the game, you unlock the ability to dual wield weapons, which is just so overpowered that there's no real reason to not dual wield as much as possible. I don't know why you had to find a super serum to just be able to hold a gun in each hand, but it's probably just been done to gatekeep that mechanic early on, because otherwise you just steamroll through those earlier missions. But you know what? I'm not one to look a gift horse in the mouth, especially when that gift horse lets you wield 2 pump-action shotguns and magically reload each of them without losing a beat. At one point you can even get incendiary rounds, which are more or less like dragon's breath shells. Yeah, I guess someone saw John Wick 4, hey? And the visual spectacle of firing these in slow motion, it's just ludicrous. But then dual wielding these things makes it even more insane. And if you want, you can even take it that little bit further and dual wield grenade launchers. At which point you pretty much just become death, destroying worlds. Visually too, Trepang2 just looks awesome at times. The modelling for all the weapons is really accurate and lifelike, and some of the environments are really striking to look at with a lot of good variety. Kind of reminds me a lot of those locations you'd see in like a finale in a John Wick film, where it's like these architecturally unique environments where strong lines combine with harsh light. One of the missions in the Pandora Institute, for instance, features the kind of environments that go beyond just being window dressing and are just downright artistic. And then the violence and the gore is just on another level. It's common to leave rooms strewn with the body parts of your fallen enemies, and you'll see intestines flying out during nasty explosions, and at one point I even saw someone's brain. gets to the point where after heavy combat, you're literally just covered in blood and, yeah, not your own.
Call an ambulance! Call an ambulance! But not for me!
The best looking effects are when you destroy like paper or wood, and watching a bunch of shit like that blow up in slow motion is like an orgasm for your eyes. A lot of these darker underground areas feature really impressive dynamic lighting, with light shining through fences and other materials to give it this real dithered look. And it's just another one of those instances where it really seems like the UE4 engine has been put to good use, mostly. Now I say mostly only because the amount of environmental interaction is kind of inconsistent, and outside of those destructible surfaces which can always be blown apart, it does seem like a lot of the props in the game world are more or less just completely nailed down. And it will never cease to amaze me how, despite engines being so much more advanced these days, that physics engines just peaked back in the early to mid 2000s and they've just never developed from that. So it's just a shame that despite Trepang2 looking pretty damn good across the board and having a high level of detail, that level of detail didn't carry across to the physics for every single little element. One thing I'll say too is that the music and the dialogue mixing is just all over the place, with these loud, overbearing metal tracks playing during almost every single combat encounter, often being so deafening that it cancels out the radio chatter entirely.
What did he say?
I gotta say too, like, I just don't think the music fits all that well with the combat, and when you compare it to the minimalistic soundtrack we got in a game like Fear, for instance, it just makes that even more apparent. Yeah, look, you can always just turn the music down if you want to, which I'd actually probably recommend, because it just sounds like the kind of thing on an edgy 15-year-old's MySpace page. But look, either way, if all you signed up for here was a gloriously violent shooter that encapsulates the term gun porn, well, look no further, bitch. However, people who were hoping that the whole thing would be brought together by a cohesive campaign with a story that actually makes sense are probably going to be disappointed. Because this campaign, it's just kind of a mess. And it really begs the question, is good gunplay enough?
How about new?
Things start off pretty good, at least with an opening level which is without a doubt the highlight for the entire campaign. Starts off showing 106 being held in some kind of remote top secret laboratory, being forced to watch what I assume is some kind of subliminal programming, before then getting set free by a mysterious figure who quickly vanishes. You're then on the loose and trying to make your escape, soon finding the keys to your handcuffs and a basic weapon to defend yourself with. Then from there it's a series of really intense shootouts in these dimly lit interior environments, fighting back against this militaristic force that really doesn't want you to escape. And the reason is because you really are this super dangerous hidden away experiment that really can't be unleashed on the world. It's also a bit of a good tutorial to how the combat works with your two basic abilities, Focus Mode and that Cloak. Focus Mode, of course, just being your standard bullet time mechanic, slowing everything down around you, but allowing you to move more or less in real time, giving you that much needed advantage over your enemies. And then the Cloak is, well, yeah, Cloak. You go invisible for a few seconds, which is handy for breaking line of sight and leaving the enemy wondering where the hell you've gone. And using the both of those in combination with that slide move, you become pretty much unstoppable, and can pretty much bully most of what the game throws at you. You're really intended to be a force in nature here from the get-go. It's like they're trying to give you the sense that you're a wild animal that's been let out of its cage. And you're barely out of your shackles for 2 minutes before you start committing all-out crimes against nature on these unfortunate soldiers who are here on cleanup duty. Then after a shootout in an area that can only be described as a bad guy elevator lobby, you're extracted by your mysterious benefactors, that group called the Syndicate, and taken to their secret underground lair in a hollowed-out cave. No volcano, sadly. The Syndicate is trying to stop the evil conglomerate named Horizon, which is some kind of global research company involved in private security, scientific research, and defense engineering, among a whole bunch of other shit. In fact, they even made a mock-up website for the company to promote it, which I've got to admit is a neat little touch. So yeah, like off the bat, it sounds like an interesting premise, and you expect to deal with lots of twists and turns along the way, right? Unsure of who you're going to be able to trust in this dark and depressing world. Only as soon as you first get to that Syndicate safe house, you'll notice how much the place echoes. And the reason for that is that aside from the soldiers in the chopper and the quartermaster who serves absolutely no function whatsoever, the entire place is just completely empty. Yeah, there's nobody anywhere at all. Just rows and rows of workstations, but no one behind them. All the dialogue you get from these higher-ups in the Syndicate comes across the radio from characters who don't even get a basic portrait.
Thanks to your efforts, you've set Horizon's progress back by a few years.
And all the friendly NPCs who do talk are hidden behind masks, which is a classic trick that indie games use to save time and effort spent on lip-syncing. And look, that's fine, I get it, this is a game made by like 4 people. They don't have a huge budget for motion capture or any of that kind of stuff. But I mean, would it really have killed them to just have a bunch of random NPCs like sitting at these desks, arbitrarily typing on keyboards to at least give it some semblance of being an actual functional place?
Not you, henchman, arbitrarily turning knobs, making it seem like you're doing something.
Just kind of feels like a test map that's not been populated yet, or the waiting room for a Call of Duty server before you're sent to the 1v1 in the Gulag. And this is the main problem, because Trepang2's campaign, it just doesn't feel like a campaign. It's a series of missions in entirely different locations which just feel completely disconnected from one another, all brought together through a hub that's completely vacant and disconnected from reality. Oops, there goes gravity. What starts off as a story that seems like it's going to have you working with this shady clandestine operation, fighting back against this corrupt corporation, suddenly just seems so barren. And it's like all the people who work for the Syndicate are talking to you through Zoom calls or something because they didn't want to come into the office that day.
Best we can do is keep their numbers down.
Missions often just load right in and you're in the thick of things. There's no cinematics showing how you got there. A flyover that might show the scale of the whole area, nothing. Just kind of fades in and voila, off you go. I think the second mission in the game, in fact, is the only one that actually shows your character dropping into the location itself, where you're dropping onto this hostile building as your chopper's under fire. The third mission takes place in this very odd European-looking location, where you're moving through the never-ending libraries and archives of some weird cult, killing all their mask and suit-wearing members, and this just feels like an entirely different game. Not to mention these guys own so many fucking books, it's a wonder the place hasn't been rendered to dust by termites. From roughly this point on, it almost starts to feel more like an SCP game, where you're going from site to site, killing generic bad guys in droves, but then also having to eliminate all these bizarre monstrosities on the Syndicate's behalf. The second mission introduces these zombie-like enemies that run around spitting acid, an enemy type that never appears again, by the way, and there's an embarrassingly easy way to get past these guys by baiting them with your cloak to a single spot like they're moss to a flame, at which point you can just throw a grenade out and finish them all off at once. And then the main boss for that mission is against a variant of the Mothman. Yeah, not the cute fuzzy one from Fallout 76 either. Oh yeah, and that's also not including all the other various boss fights as well, most of which just involve shooting an enemy over and over while trying to run in the opposite direction. They're short horror sequences here and there, but often they're over as soon as they begun. And the first half of one of the last missions is just comprised of running around empty rooms while spooky sounds play in the background. 1.2 in this mission, you literally find your way into the back rooms. No, seriously. And it's just kind of like, what the fuck is going on here? The loose connection between all of these is that Horizon is responsible for either using these sites for research or creating these abominations, but that just seems like a pretty thin justification and like a bit of an afterthought as a way to make all these missions seem connected. So you really just feel like you're going through the motions for each mission, going from room to room, shooting things until the whole thing comes to an end. It's one of those games that expects you to read all the journals and notes that you come across to fill in the backstory, and look, that kind of thing works fine if it's handled properly. As a recent example, the journals you come across in Amnesia the Bunker, for instance, more or less told you the entire timeline of the events that led up to right before the moment the campaign kicked off for the player. Or in the case of the System Shock remake, journals would give important clues for your objectives and even crucial door codes you had to find to progress. The notes and intel in Trepang2 though are mostly just completely useless tidbits of information. Pointless diary entries from, maintenance workers or other personnel that don't really tell anything all that interesting. Got to the point that I just stopped reading them after like the 4th mission when I realized they were just slowing me down and distracting me from killing things. And I mean, that's all that anybody's really playing this for, right? And again, off the back of that, it is worth mentioning just how amazing that combat actually is. It gets to that point where you just can't wait to get back in there and keep fucking things up. But it's also a good example of how a really good baseline like that is kind of meaningless if it has no direction or structure. It's like they made that first demo a few years back and they had a really good vertical slice of what they were going to base the entire game off, only they just never really developed it much further than that, and haphazardly threw together a bunch of random missions and vague plot points to try to connect all the dots. I mean, check out this exciting bit of dialogue that takes place almost entirely on a black screen.
Not even 1 week since your escape, and you've already destroyed one of my facilities.
Outside of the main story missions are the so-called side missions, and these aren't even really missions. They're just challenge maps in a single locked-off arena that repeat the same mechanics. Like, there's a couple where you've got to hack into 3 different computer terminals, holding your position on each of them while waves of enemies spawn in, having to periodically find and kill enemy hackers who interrupt the process. It's quite literally just wave-based, with enemy counts increasing with each ensuing wave, and oddly too, the option to buy ammo, weapons, and other items from these boxes when you've earned enough cash. And that right there is just even more odd. Like, these enemies were nice enough to leave a fucking guns and ammo kiosk sitting there on the ground for you. Another one has you killing the apparent remaining members of that cult from the main story mission, and it is, yet again, another wave-based map, where you probably kill more of them here than you did on their actual home turf. Probably the worst one though is this air crash site where you just get attacked from every single direction, and for some reason on this one you don't even get told how many waves are left. Also, I swear too, this whole area is just a homage to that black box multiplayer map from Modern Warfare 3. Every now and then a so-called high value target's gonna spawn in during the middle of these, which is just the same as a standard enemy but often covered in armor and having a more dangerous weapon. But there is some kind of purpose to these missions, because you will find unlockable weapon attachments on these maps as well.
106, I got you some supplies.
But they just don't feel like side missions in the traditional sense, probably because they weren't even intended to be. I mean, there's even that side mode called the Combat Simulator, which is just waves of enemies on different maps, and this is almost the exact same thing as these so-called side missions. There was one mission that started off kind of promisingly, where you start off at some abandoned house in the middle of nowhere, and it looks pretty ominous and spooky, to the point that I started to think it might be different to the rest of them. Wrong! After exploring the house for a bit, you find a trapdoor underneath it, classic, and make your way through these creepy underground tunnels to reach a giant server room where all these corpses are strung up in this very theatrical and unnerving manner. And yeah, it becomes kind of tense, as you've got to run around turning off all these computer terminals while unsettling ambient noises haunt your ears. But then it quickly starts to become a bit tedious as you turn into the IT guy, having to turn off all these different terminals whilst avoiding these floating anomalies which look like they've come right out of a stalker game. Only to then get back to the surface as the whole place collapses to be attacked by, you guessed it, waves and waves of enemies. And this one was kind of doubly annoying because the layout of this house really suggests it's going to offer up some neat cat and mouse scenarios for the player. They've even got proximity mines strewn around the house, like they expect you to put these things to use and lay traps for your attackers. But instead, most of the enemies seem to prefer to stay outside of the house and shoot at you from the other end of this field, and because you can't aim down the sights of any of your guns, yeah, good luck trying to take them out. Was there anything to gain from doing this mission? I mean, maybe there was like a few vague plot points hidden away in the collectible intel somewhere, but it sure as hell didn't offer up any kind of revelation or crucial story detail as far as I could tell. It was just another mission where I ended up killing a platoon of bad guys. But you know what? Maybe that's what the entire game just should have been. Just a series of randomly connected missions from the get-go, instead of trying to force in this overarching plot. You ever play that game called Severed Steel? Well, it did exactly that. It was a very similar game to Trepang2, only it happens to have a few more mechanics like wall running and an unlocked Y-axis. But still, similar combat with high-octane, high-speed gunfights and heavy usage of bullet time. And that entire game was just random maps you could play through over and over to get the best possible result. And I don't know, man, maybe Trepang2 just should have followed suit and set its sights a little bit lower. Because when you're messing around in that combat simulator, which is really the highlight of the whole game, you'll realise just how little that story actually matters. Trepang2 isn't a very long game. Like I said earlier, there's only 6 main story missions, and the only reason to beat these is if you want to find all those weapon attachments and unlock all the cheats, the latter of which sadly revert the game to easy mode and cancel achievements when they're activated, which kind of makes you wonder why you'd even bother at that point. And yeah, look, Trepang2 might genuinely offer up some of the most satisfying shooting in any FPS game I think I've ever played, but the sheer lack of a solid campaign and the structure to tie it all together, it does make that aspect of the game feel empty and unfulfilling. And it's a shame because it started off so promising and seemed like it was really going to go places, but vaguely connected environments linked together without any kind of overarching antagonist, it's just not all that interesting.
You were never supposed to be a weapon.
You want to get a photo together or something?
I think the real value is going to come with messing around in that combat simulator and just seeing how insanely over the top you can make those gunfights. And yeah, I can say without a doubt that that's where I had the most fun myself. I'm guessing they're going to be bringing out more content in the future, and I wouldn't be surprised too if they make like a VR mod for this thing as well. Either way though, yeah, look, at the end of the day, it does have value, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't have high hopes for this. But look, dog, for an FPS that lets you murder cultists with dual grenade launchers, it's unbeatable.